Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyatya Deshatarine Trinadapi Sunichena Tarar Ivasishnuna Amanina Hanadena Kirtaniya Sadahari. Hare Nama Hare Nama Hare Nama Vakivalam Kalau Nastyeva 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 Gatir Anyata. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Go Bhakta Vrinda. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Nama Krishna Yadavaya Namaha Gopala Govinda Rama Shri Madhusudana. Hare Nama Krishna Yadavaya Namaha Gopala Govinda Rama Shri Madhusudana. Hare Nama Krishna Yadavaya Namaha Gopala Govinda Rama Shri Madhusudana. Govinda Jaya Jaya Gopala Jaya Jaya Radha Ramana Hari Govinda Jaya Jaya Govinda Jaya Jaya Gopala Jaya Jaya Radha Ramana Hari Govinda Jaya Jaya Radha Ramana Hari Govinda Jaya Jaya Radha Ramana Hari Govinda Jaya Jaya. Krishna 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 Hey Krishna Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna Hey. Krishna Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Raksha Mam. Krishna Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Pahi Mam. Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Raksha Mam. Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Pahi Mam. Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Raksha Mam. Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Pahi Mam. Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Raksha Mam. Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Pahi Mam. Om Namah Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Just to bring us up to speed, and especially for those who may have missed the last few classes, we have returned to Vrndavan because Krishna has sent his confidential servant Udava with a message for the residents of Vrndavan and the residents, namely the Gopis in particular. And in the previous two classes, we heard Radharani speaking like a madwoman in ecstasy, accusing the bumblebee that was flying hither and thither as being a representative of Krishna. And at first, Radharani was accusing Krishna, speaking to the bumblebee, accusing Krishna of so many faults. But then the bumblebee flew away, and Radharani became worried that perhaps the bumblebee had returned to Krishna and had told him everything she was saying that was negative about Krishna. But then the bumblebee returned, and Radharani showed the opposite side and was very hopeful that perhaps Krishna would eventually leave the women of Mathura and come back to the Gopis, to whom he was very much indebted to and who loved Krishna more than their very lives. We ended up with Udava glorifying the Gopis and also explaining to them Krishna's direct message to them. And you may recall that when Krishna wrote the message, he was emotional. And so Udava did not show them the actual letter, but read it to them and explained it. And we also heard Srila Prabhupada give extensive explanation of each of the lines of Krishna's message. Now, when the Gopis also heard Udava glorifying them, they were not very much interested in hearing their own glorification. They were more interested in hearing what Krishna's message had in store for them. So now, in this next episode, the Gopis will inquire directly from Udava. And one of the last things we heard last week is that some Vaishnava scholars say that the bumblebee was actually Krishna himself in disguise, trying to get the association of Radharani. So this next section is called the Gopis' Inquiries. The Gopis therefore received Udava very happily and began to speak as follows. O Udava, we have heard that King Kamsa, who was always a source of trouble for the Yadu dynasty, has now been killed by Krishna, and this is good news for us. We hope, therefore, that the members of the Yadu dynasty are now very happy in the association of Krishna, who can fulfill all the desires of his devotees. My dear Udava, kindly let us know whether or not Krishna sometimes thinks of us while in the midst of the highly enlightened society girls there in Mathura. We know that women and girls in Mathura are not village women. They, instead, are enlightened and beautiful. Their bashful, smiling glances and other feminine features must be very pleasing to Krishna. We know very well that Krishna is always fond of the behavior of beautiful women. So it seems, therefore, that Krishna has become entrapped by the women of Mathura. So, my dear Udava, will you kindly let us know if Krishna sometimes remembers us within the midst of other women? Another gopi inquired from Udava, does Krishna remember the night in the midst of the kumuda flowers and the moonlight, when Vrndavan became exceedingly beautiful? Krishna was dancing with us, and the atmosphere was surcharged with the sound of footbells. We exchanged pleasing conversation at that time. Does Krishna remember that particular night? We remember that night, and we feel separation. Separation from Krishna makes us agitated, as if there is fire in our bodies. Does Krishna propose to come back to Vrndavan to extinguish that fire, just as the cloud appears in the sky to extinguish a forest fire by its downpour? Another gopi said, Krishna has killed his enemy, and Krishna has victoriously achieved the kingdom of Kamsa. Maybe Krishna is married with a king's daughter by this time, and living happily among his kinsmen and friends. Therefore, why should Krishna come back to this village of Vrndavan? Another gopi said, Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead, the husband of the goddess of fortune, and Krishna is self-sufficient. Krishna has no business either with us, the girls in the Vrndavan forest, or with the city girls in Mathura. After all, Krishna is the great super soul. Krishna has nothing to do with any of us, either here or there. Another gopi said, it is most unreasonable to hope that Krishna will come back to Vrndavan to see us. We should try instead to be happy in disappointment. Even Pingala, the great prostitute, once said that disappointment is the greatest happiness. We all know these things, but it is very difficult for us to give up the expectations of Krishna's coming back. Oh, who can forget a solitary conversation with Krishna, whose chest the goddess of fortune always remains on, in spite of Krishna's not desiring her? Oh, my dear Udava, Vrndavan is the land of rivers, forests, and cows. Here, the vibration of the flute was heard, and Krishna, along with his elder brother Sri Balaram, enjoyed the atmosphere in our company. Thus, the environment of Vrndavan constantly reminds us of Krishna and Balaram. On the land of Vrndavan are the impressions of Krishna's footprints, the residence of the goddess of fortune. And because of such signs, we cannot forget Krishna at any moment. The Gopis further expressed that Vrndavan was still full of all opulence and good fortune. There was no scarcity or want in Vrndavan as far as material necessities were concerned. But in spite of such opulence, the Gopis could never forget Krishna and Balaram. Another Gopi then said, "We constantly remember various attractive features of beautiful Krishna. We remember his walking, his smiling, his joking words. We have all become lost by the dealings of Krishna, and it is not possible for us to forget Krishna. We always pray for Krishna, exclaiming, 'Oh, dear Lord, dear husband of the goddess of fortune, dear Lord of Vrndavan, and deliverer of the distressed devotees. We are now fallen, and we are merged in an ocean of distress. Please, therefore, come back to Vrndavan and deliver us from this pitiable condition.'" Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So this episode is entitled Udava, the Shiksha Guru of the Gopis. Udava minutely studied the transcendental and abnormal condition of the Gopis in their separation from Krishna. And Udava thought it wise to repeat again and again all the pastimes the Gopis enjoyed with Krishna. In the material world, materialistic persons are always burning in a blazing fire of material miseries, while the Gopis were burning in a transcendental blazing fire due to separation from Krishna. The blazing fire exasperating the Gopis, however, is different from the fire of the material world. The Gopis constantly wanted the association of Krishna, whereas the materialistic person constantly wants the advantage of material comforts. It is stated by the great Vaishnava Acharya, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, that Krishna saved the cowherder boys from the blazing forest fire within a second while their eyes were closed. This we learned in a previous episode. So in a similar way, Udava advised the Gopis that they could be saved from the fire of separation by closing their eyes and meditating upon the activities of Krishna from the very beginning of their association with Krishna. From the outside, the gopis could visualize all the pastimes of Krishna by hearing the descriptions of Udava, and from within they could remember those pastimes. From the instructions of Udava, the gopis could understand that Krishna was not actually separate from them. As they were constantly thinking of Krishna, Krishna was also thinking of the gopis constantly, even though Krishna was living in Mathura. Udava's messages and instructions saved the gopis from imminent death, and the gopis acknowledged the benediction from Udava. Practically speaking, Udava acted as the preceptor or Siksha, instructing spiritual master of the gopis. And in return, the gopis worshipped Udava as they would Krishna himself. It is recommended in authoritative literatures that the spiritual master must be worshipped on an equal level as that of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Why? Not that he is God, but because he is a most very confidential servitor of God. And it is accepted by great authorities that the spiritual master is the external manifestation of Krishna in the heart. The gopis were relieved from their transcendental burning condition by realizing that Krishna was with them. Internally, the gopis remembered Krishna's association within their hearts. And externally, Udava helped the gopis associate with Krishna by Udava's conclusive instructions. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is described in the Vedas as Adhokshaja, which indicates that Krishna is beyond the perception of all material senses. Although beyond the range of the material senses, still Krishna is present in everyone's heart. And at the same time, Krishna is present everywhere by his all-pervasive feature of Brahman. One can realize all three transcendental features of the Absolute Truth, namely Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead, Paramatma, the localized supersoul, and the all-pervasive impersonal Brahman. So simply by studying the condition of the gopis in their meeting with Udava, as described in Srimad Bhagavatam, it is confirmed by the great Acharya, Srinivas Acharya, that the 6 Goswami disciples of Lord Chaitanya were always merged in the thoughts of the activities of the gopis. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has also recommended Aradyo Bhagavan Vrajesha Tanayas Tadama Vrndavanam Ramya Kaschid Upasana Vrajavadhu Varga Virya Kalpita. Srimad Bhagavatam Amalang Puranam Prema Pumarto Mahan Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhur Matam Idang Tatradara Napara. The gopis' method of worshiping the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the most super excellent method. Srila Shukadeva Goswami has also recommended, when he finished up his instructions to Parikshit with the 5 chapters of the Rasa Leela, which we previously studied. At that time, Shukadev said, Virkriditang vraja buddhubir idang cha Vishno, Sradanvata anusrinuyad atha varnayed ya, Bhakting parang bhagavati pratilabhya kamang, Hrid rogam ashu apahinoti achirena dhira. Anyone who hears from the bona fide, the right source, about the dealings of the Gopis with Krishna, and who follows the instructions of a bona fide spiritual master, will be elevated to the topmost position of devotional service and be able to give up the lust of material enjoyment. All the Gopis were thus solaced by the instructions of Udava. And so the Gopis requested Udava to stay in Vrndavan for a few days more. Udava agreed to their proposal and stayed with the Gopis not only for a few days, but for a few months. Udava always kept the Gopis engaged in thinking of the transcendental message of Krishna and his pastimes. And the Gopis felt as if they were experiencing direct association with Krishna. And while Udava remained in Vrndavan, the inhabitants of Vrndavan enjoyed Udava's association. And as they discussed the activities of Krishna, the days passed just like moments. Vrindavan's natural atmosphere, with the presence of the river Yamuna, its nice orchard of trees decorated with various fruits, Govardhan Hill, caves, blooming flowers, all of these combined to inspire Udava to narrate Krishna's pastimes. The inhabitants of Vrindavan enjoyed Udava's association in the same way as they enjoyed the association of Krishna himself. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. This section is called What Udava Learned from the Gopis. Udava was attracted by the attitude of the Gopis because the Gopis were completely attached to Krishna. And Udava was inspired by the Gopis' anxiety for Krishna. Udava offered the Gopis respectful obeisances and composed songs in praise of their transcendental qualities, such as, among all living entities who have accepted the human form of life, the Gopis are super excellently successful in their mission. Their thought is eternally absorbed in the lotus feet of Krishna. Great sages and we ourselves also try to be absorbed in meditation upon the lotus feet of Krishna. But the Gopis, having lovingly accepted the Lord, are automatically accustomed to this and do not depend on any yoga practice. And so the conclusion is that one who has attained the Gopis' condition of life does not have to take birth as Lord Brahma or be born in a Brahmana family or even be initiated as a Brahmana. This prayer by Udava confirms Lord Krishna's own statement in the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Manghi partha vyapasritya yepi syu papa yonaya striyo vaishyas tata shudras tepi yanti parangatim. One who takes shelter of Krishna for the right purpose, whether one be a Shudra, a woman, or a member of a low-grade family, or born in a sinful family, doesn't matter. If one takes shelter of Krishna, one will attain the highest goal of life. The Gopis have set the standard of devotion for the whole world. One who follows in the footsteps of the Gopis by constantly thinking of Krishna can attain the highest perfectional stage of spiritual life. The Gopis were not born of any high-cultured family, but rather of simple cowherd men. And yet, the Gopis developed the highest love of Krishna, who is the Supersoul, who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and who is the Supreme Brahman. So, for self-realization or God-realization, there is no need to take birth in a high family. The only thing needed is development of ecstatic love of God. In achieving perfection in Krishna consciousness, no other qualification is required than to be constantly engaged in the loving service of Krishna, who is the supreme nectar, the reservoir of all pleasure. The effect of taking up Krishna consciousness is just like that of drinking nectar. With or without one's knowledge, the nectar will act. The active principle of Krishna consciousness will equally manifest itself everywhere. It does not matter how or where one has taken his or her birth. Krishna will bestow his benediction upon anyone who takes to Krishna consciousness without any doubt. Udava continued to speak to the Gopis. The supreme benediction attained by the Gopis, in spite of their being born in the families of cowherder men, was never attained even by the goddess of fortune herself, and certainly not by the denizens of heaven, though the bodily scent of the women in the heavenly planets is exactly like the scent of the lotus flower. The Gopis are so fortunate that during the Rasa Leela, Krishna personally embraced them with his arms and kissed them face to face. Certainly, it is not possible for any woman in the three worlds to achieve this except for the Gopis. Therefore, I wish to take birth as one of the plants or creepers in Vrndavan who are so fortunate that the Gopis might trample upon them. The Gopis have so lovingly served Krishna, who is known as Mukunda, the giver of liberation, and who is searched after by great sages and saintly persons. For Krishna's sake only, the Gopis left everything, their families, their children, their friends, their houses, and all worldly connections. Udava thus appreciated the exalted positions of the Gopis and wished to fall down and take the dust of their feet on his head. Yet Udava did not dare to ask the Gopis to offer the dust from their feet. Perhaps they would not be agreeable. Therefore, to have his head smeared with the dust of the gopis' feet, without their knowledge, Udava desired to become only an insignificant clump of grass or herbs in the land of Vrndavan. The gopis were so much attracted to Krishna that when they heard the vibration of Krishna's flute, they instantly left their homes, family, children, honor, and feminine bashfulness, and ran towards the place where Krishna was standing. The gopis did not consider whether they were passing over the road or through the jungles. Imperceptibly, the dust of the gopis' feet was bestowed on small grasses and herbs of Vrndavan. Not daring to place the dust of the gopis' feet on his own head in this life, Udava aspired to have a future birth as the position of a clump of grass or herbs in Vrndavan. Udava would then be able to have the dust of the gopis' feet. Udava appreciated the extraordinary fortune of the gopis, who were relieved of all material pangs and anxieties by contact with the lotus feet of Krishna, which are worshipped not only by the goddess of fortune, but also by such exalted demigods as Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva, and which great yogis also meditate upon within their hearts. Thus, Udava prayed to be constantly honored by the dust from the lotus feet of the gopis, whose chanting of Lord Krishna's transcendental pastimes has become celebrated all over the three worlds. After living in Vrndavan for some time, Udava desired to go back to Krishna, and Udava begged permission to leave from Nanda Maharaj and Yashoda Mata. Udava had a farewell meeting with the gopis, and also taking permission from them, Udava mounted his chariot and started for Mathura. When Udava was about to leave, all the inhabitants of Vrndavan, headed by Nanda and Yashoda, came to bid Udava goodbye and presented Udava with various kinds of valuable goods secured in Vrndavan. They expressed their feelings with tears in their eyes due to intense attachment to Krishna. All the residents of Vrndavan desired a benediction from Udava. They desired to always remember the glorious activities of Krishna, and they simply wanted their minds to be always fixed upon Krishna's lotus feet, their words to be always engaged in glorifying Krishna, and their bodies to be always engaged in bowing down as they constantly remembered Krishna. This prayer of the inhabitants of Vrndavan is the super excellent type of self-realization. The method is very simple. Number 1, to fix the mind always on the lotus feet of Krishna. 2, to talk always of Krishna without passing on to any other material subject matter. And number 3, to engage one's body constantly in Krishna's service. Especially in this human form of life, one should engage one's life, resources, words, and intelligence for the service of Krishna. Only such activities can elevate a human being to the highest level of perfection. This is the verdict of all scriptural authorities. The inhabitants of Vrndavan finally said, "By the will of the supreme authority and according to the results of our own work, we may take our birth anywhere. It doesn't matter where we are born, because our only prayer is that we may simply be engaged in Krishna consciousness." A pure devotee of Lord Krishna never desires to be promoted to the heavenly planets, or even to Vaikuntha, or even Goloka Vrndavan. Why is that? Because the pure devotee has no desire for one's own personal satisfaction. Indeed, a pure devotee regards heaven and hell to be on an equal level. Without Krishna, heaven is hell, and with Krishna, hell is heaven. When Udava had been sufficiently honored and worshipped by all the pure devotees of Vrndavan, Udava returned to Mathura and to his master Krishna. After offering respects by bowing down before Lord Krishna and Balaram, Udava described the wonderful devotional life of the inhabitants of Vrndavan. Udava presented all the gifts which were given by the inhabitants of Vrndavan and delivered them to Vasudeva, to the father of Krishna, as well as to Ugrasena, Krishna's grandfather. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So there's one little section left, and then we're completely free. We're completely done with this Udava section. This one is called Udava Returns to Vrndavan. For days together, Krishna heard from Udava all the details of his visit to Vrndavan, especially the condition of his father and mother, and of the Gopis and the cowherder boys. Lord Krishna was fully satisfied that Udava was able to solace them by his instructions and by the message delivered to them. Lord Krishna then decided to go to the house of Kubja, the hunchback girl who had pleased Krishna by offering Krishna sandalwood pulp when Krishna was entering the city of Mathura before killing Kamsa. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, Ye yatha mang prabhadyante tangs tataiva bhajamyaham mama vartmanu vartante manusya parata sarvasha. Krishna always tries to please his devotees as much as the devotees try to please Krishna. As the devotees always think of Krishna within their hearts, Krishna also thinks of his devotees within himself. It's time for your Christmas blessing. Hari Bol. Namaste Narasimhaya Praklad Aklad Dayane Hiranya Kashipo Vakshaha Shilatangana Kalaye Ito Narsinga Parato Narsingo Yato yato yamitato Nrsimha. Bahir Nrsimha, Hridaye Nrsimha. Nrsimha Madim Sharanang Prapadye. Nrsimha Madim Sharanang Prapadye. Nrsimha Adim Sharanang Prapadye. Tavakara Kamalavare Nakam Adbhuta Sringam. Dalita Hiranya Kashipo Tanu Bringam. Keshavadrita Narahadi Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare. Jai Jagadisha Hare. Jai Jagadisha Hare. Keshavadrita Narahadi Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare. Jai Jagadisha Hare. Jai Jagadisha Hare. Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Om Tat Sat.